Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to Multimodular. Today we're looking at the SSL BiG 6. And this is me, massively out of my comfort zone. Mixers, really? Well, it's interesting. It's interesting in that SSL got in touch with me to say, hey, you make music on synths and stuff, and perhaps you're even known for saying that mixers are not really your sort of thing, not really your bag. You don't see the point in having this big desktop thing. You like to integrate your mixers into your Eurorack. Well, how about that we lend you a bit of a mixer just to see whether we can drag out of you a different workflow. Would it inspire you to work differently? How well would that work in your environment? And perhaps you could share that with your audience. So here I am, mixer, me, audience. Who knows? Well, I mean, it's a tricky question, because I have in the past questioned the idea of having a desktop mixer purely because it's one of those enormous things that tends to get in the way. And it's yet another thing you have to fiddle with. I mean, you've got enough to fiddle with that really, in the freneticness of a live performance, or if you're just trying to capture something, do you really need another workflow to have to work through? And does that bring anything to the table? Or is it just a cumbersome thing you have to stumble over in trying to mix things together? Because ultimately mixing is just turning stuff up and turning stuff down. I mean, we do that within the context of our Eurorack or other bits and pieces. We're doing that a lot. We have VCAs, we have mixer modules, we combine signals, whether that's audio or voltage, and we deal with that within our Eurorack situation. So what could, if anything, a mixer bring to that party? Well, I mean, I'm an open-minded kind of guy, so I said, well, yeah, you know, I'll give it a go. I'll give it a go. And all I can really do in this video and for you is just to try to bring what I found. So this is what I've found that I can do with this. This is how this is going to contribute to my workflow. And I've worked for the last couple of weeks on just trying to get my head around the ins, the outs, the flows, the routing, and discovering those moments where you just go, yeah, I never would have done this had I not had this device. And is it this specific device? I mean, really, I'm talking about mixing in general to some degree. But of course, the focus is going to be on this fella here, because it's quite an amazing piece of gear. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, I can't sit here and say, oh, yeah, right. So the compressor on here sounds just like it did back in the day when I was working at that studio with all those big SSL consoles. No, I have no clue whether that sounds like a thing, which sounds like a thing, or whether the bus compressor on here is as authentic as the SSL bus compressor they claim it to be. I don't know. I'm just turning things up and I'm turning things down. Turning things down, turning this one up, and I'm turning things down. That is essentially what I'm looking at doing. So I'm going to present to you what I've discovered, my workflow, how I use this, because there's 1,000 ways you can use a mixer. You can use it for all sorts of things in all sorts of routings. But this is what I've gotten out of it, because I have to come to a point where I go, right, this is what I understand, and this is what I'm going to show to you good people, in the hope that that will in some ways inspire you to think about mixing, potentially to present this product in an interesting and uniquely molten modular way, and also to ask questions of it. Why this? Why that? Do you really need that? Is that important? Because up to this point I've mixed in mixers within my Eurorack. Little bits or larger bits go into a stereo output, and then that's it. Stereo output to a recorder, to the computer, or whatever it is. And that's all I've been interested in. I kind of like the odd auxiliary send for effects, bits and pieces like that, so I can use a reverb a little bit more globally. That's a good thing. But generally speaking, I've ignored mixing to any great degree. So this, to me, turns into a really interesting way of stepping out of my comfort zone, stepping out of my sphere of knowledge and influence, and just trusting in the idea that sound engineers and console manufacturers kind of know what they're doing, and it brings something that perhaps I haven't considered before. So that's where I am. I don't know how you're doing, but this is where I am. So come with me if you dare, and let's see if we can work out what this is all about. And is it any good for a synthesizer studio, which is kind of what I have here, I think. I mean, I should point out actually that since I started on this and I posted a few things on social media, all sorts of people have cropped up saying, oh yeah, they've got one of those and thinks it's fantastic. It's been quite revealing, and it also makes me think, oh, okay, maybe I'm on the right lines here. Maybe this is exactly what SSL think it is, because their thinking was really that perhaps people don't understand how useful this could be in a synthesizer environment. And that's kind of the message they want to get out there. But people like, for instance, DivKid, Chris Mayer, Alex Ball, the Galaxy Electric crew, all of them have this mixer and have been going, yeah, it's great. And, look at this, look at that. And that's been enormously helpful because it sort of roots me in the idea that I'm not just out there, doing something weird and crazy, that actually this is a working solution in lots of places. So what am I trying to get to? So I'm going to take you through what I do, how I've plugged it in, how it works, the pitfalls, the dangers, the terrible things that I've discovered. We're going to stick Eurorack and synthesizers through it. We're going to try recording to a thing. We're then going to use it as an audio interface through my computer and do some shenanigans with that too, and perhaps at the very end compare it to a much cheaper mixer to see whether you need this product in particular or whether it's just a mixer which is really bringing an interesting change to your workflow. So first of all, what is this mixer and does it really matter? Well, yes, it probably matters. It's £2,000 worth of mixer. I mean, of course it's going to matter. I mean, the stuff that's poured into here, SSL tell me, is all the most fabulous technologies that they've ever come up with in all those years of doing big mixers for big people. So what I think we have to take from that, because there's no way that in this video I can show you how the channel strip on this sounds better than some other channel strip. That's not what we're trying to achieve here. Trying to show whether this is a useful thing to have in your studio. Is it improving my creativity? Is it giving me another thing to do? So that's really the angle that I'm coming at. So from that, I'm going to have to assume that the stuff in here is great, that the stuff in here is worth the £2,000 price tag. It has to be, right? Because it's coming from a manufacturer that manufactures huge, amazing consoles that people use in big studios. So we're going to have to go with that. If you've got opinions on the sound quality test, that's fine, but that's not something I'm going to be going into particularly. It's much more to do with workflow and how that inspires my creativity. So what do we have? Well, we have 4 channels of super analog. What's super analog? Well, it's kind of a marketing term that doesn't really mean anything as far as I can work out. In the blurb, it talks about how super analog is just their best ideas put together into one thing, into this channel strip. So these 4 here are super analog. These ones over here evidently are pretty crap in comparison, but I don't believe that actually to be the case, but that's kind of what it says to me in my warped mind. As soon as you point out something being excellent, you kind of end up putting everything else out being not so excellent. I don't think that's the intention. I think what they're trying to say is you've got 4 channels of the best channel strip for analog recording that they could possibly come up with. So you've got 4 of those. And then you've got 4 stereo channels, which are a little bit more run-of-the-mill, regular SSL, high quality bits and pieces. It's just that they don't have the same preamp architecture built in, because they're not for microphones, they're for stereo line sources. Whereas the super analog side is for mic, line, guitar, whatever you want to throw into it, with the whole gaining structure that you require for that to work. So I think that's my understanding of what they mean. So 4 mono channels here, 4 stereo channels here. There's lots of other ins and outs as well, which are at times confusing and nonsensical, but they're there. So as people say, oh yeah, no, it's the big 6, right? And the 6 means, I don't know what the 6 means. Not going to dwell on that. The 6 has something to do with the fact there's 4 of these and 4 of these, and yet there's 18 in total somewhere. Was it 16? 15 and 16, you know, I don't know. I don't know what the SiX is about. I don't know how that refers to four of these, and yet there's more of these other ones. Am I confusing you yet? Yes, I've confused myself. But let's not dwell on these things. Let's find our way through this mixer, ignore some of the craziness, and just get it turning stuff up, turning stuff down. Right, come on, man. Let's bring this together into some kind of coherent video. So what should we do? Let's go through a channel and just look at what's going on. And let me show you how I've got this wire together. So currently I'm going Eurorack from over here, because I can, because that's the great thing. I'm mixing stuff from different sources. Because I'm not using a little tiny mixer within Eurorack context, I've been able to kind of open my chest and to breathe in a lot more sources, a lot more interesting stuff from places. So I've got some from over there, I've got a keyboard here, that's all going in, and it's all being mixed together. And that, just that action in itself is quite dramatic to how I'm thinking about what I'm doing. Because in a bunch of this, you narrow down, you focus in. Everything is small, everything is bringing together. I mean, it's good, and it's a great space to work in, because you feel the restrictions, but you're filling that space, and you kind of push into every corner of what you're doing. Yeah, that's great. The mixer opens that up, which brings in, additional decision making, but also it lets you breathe into a larger space. There's goods and bad things to all of that. I've enjoyed the restrictive nature of Eurorack, how it brings you in. But that doesn't mean I can't also enjoy enveloping a larger space. It's interesting to think about. I've been doing an awful lot of thinking. My entire last couple of weeks, my brain has been ticking through this, trying to work out. So, and I could just sit here and just continue to talk in strange and poetic ways, but I'm not. We're going to get in and really think about it. So what have I got going on? Well, I've got Eurorack coming in from here. I've got something else coming in here. I've got a bit of a kick drum coming in there. Got some percussion coming in there. Some big paddy stuff coming in there. I've got a moody sound coming in there. And then I've got this. It's great, and look, I can turn these things up, and look, I can turn these things down, and it's smooth, and it's delicious, and it's huge. Look at how it feels like I'm using a proper piece of studio equipment because of that yawning distance that travels. It travels further than an entire Eurorack module. And then of course it's a mixer, so I can pan stuff about the place. Is that effective? I don't know. And I've also got effect sense. Or have I? Well, I sort of do, because I've made it that way. We'll get to the details shortly. I'm just giving you a quick overview. I can turn on some kind of compressor. Is that a good thing? I'm never quite sure. We'll take it out again. I've got EQ. can shape things, you know, tonally. Bring things back to the middle. So that's just a general vibe of stuff I've got through, and I'm trying to engage with how it makes me feel. And when compared to a Eurorack mixer, what I tend to do in Eurorack, I mean, I set it and then I mute stuff in and out. That's pretty much it. Whereas here, I'm not really using the mute buttons quite so much. I can do, but I tend to favour the faders because they're so nice. It feels so good. It feels like I'm interacting with what's going on. But to get to this point has taken a bit of work. It's not immediately obvious. I mean, mixers often confuse the heck out of you. I mean, I remember at one turnkey Christmas party when the place was full with wannabe sound engineers and no one could get sound out of that bloody mixer. There's like 20 minutes of all these sound engineers going, oh, we're trying to get the band through the mixer so we could start our Christmas party. You know, mixers are confusing, particularly in a position of tension and pressure. You're going, oh, I don't know. And there's always that danger that building creativity that you have is going to be lost because you can't find the right button to make the sound come out of the right hole. Or you might have wired it in backwards in the first place. There's so much room for error, for wrong pathways to walk down, because mixers can be complicated and they look complicated. Now, one thing that's immediately brilliant about this is how wide it is. What I mean is, you often see mixers that have just got channels packed in. They're packed in and it's a whole, you know, line after line after line. Each channel here is so wide, it's so huge. You've got room to look in. You've got your metering next to your fader, which I love in particular. You've got everything is laid out in a luxurious space that you have room to breathe and room to think and room to see and visualize exactly what's going on. You can see it, and I think that's vitally important. What you can't see, other than these four here, is the bloody connections. Where are they? How do you plug anything into it? So let's move on from this monologue into looking at how this actually functions. Right. So let's have a look at one of our super analog channels. So how have I got this connected? I've got 4 channels set up here. Now these are coming from the Eurorack. Now the first thing that you're going to have to get once you have this is some kind of patch bay. Unless you are permanently wiring it into a permanent configuration, then the back of the Big SiX is going to drive you nuts. Because it's not that it's here, it's under here. To plug anything in the back is an absolute nightmare. It just is. I mean, it's very neat because it's all recessed in the back here, so it's all the cabling is out of the way, and that's beautiful. But if you're swapping in different things, coming from different places, trying to plug those in, it will drive you nuts, and it will completely drain you of any sort of creativity. It's all gone because you're so frustrated and fed up, you just don't want to do anything. So what you need some kind of patch bay. Now, patch bays are all sorts of things. You could have a 1U row of things that plug in and then plug out the back that's permanently wired in. So the idea of a patch bay is that you permanently wire these connections at the back to something else, to the back of something, which then gives you a connection in the front that you can plug into much, much easier. That's the function of a patch bay. And you can get them in 1U, you can get them in boxes and other bits and pieces. But what I'm using, something which is particularly clever, I think, and I'd like to just show this to you, and that's the back to front from Voltage Vibes, which is over here, which you can't. Let me Now hopefully in here you can see this, because it's in use, obviously it's got things patched into it. Now this is a 1U version, it also does it in a 3U version. And so the idea is that you've got these patch sockets in the front, they go, funnily enough, to patch sockets in the back. Now if you've got patch sockets in the back of a Eurorack module, then where the heck are they going to go? Well, that's the clever thing. They all come out of here. They come out of this wonderful thing called Molten's hole, which is something that Peter at Voltage Vibes designed, and then I improved upon by suggesting he put this rubber grommet in it, and so he named it after me, which is rather nice. So it's like a little anus. It's like an orifice sticking out of your Eurorack through which you can pass patch cables. So you pass a bunch of patch cables through there. They then plug into the back of this. So look, I've got another one here, another slightly different one. But that's exactly the same idea. So patch in the front, patch out the back. So the cable goes in the back and then you can patch to it on the front. So what I've done is I've got 6 cables through here because that's about all I could fit. And I've got the first 4 going to the first 4 channels, which are the ones you can actually access, but hey, never mind. And then I've got 2 going into the back, like using a patch bay properly. And that enables me to plug stuff in here from my Eurorack and it to go directly to the mixer without me having to worry about long cables or extra bits and pieces or trying to get round the back of the bloody thing. So there you go, a patch bay. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant Voltage Vibes. Right, back to where we were. So back to our enormous console here. So I'm into Super Analog 1. At the top here you can choose between line, high Z for guitars or microphone. It's got phantom power and all that kind of thing. So I'm plugged in here. It's coming directly from Eurorack. Now traditionally Eurorack doesn't like line level things. It's different. It's very hot. It's got a high level of signal. So probably you're supposed to do something else. But I've always been of the opinion that if you've got a preamp, if you've got an amplifier with which you set a level, it doesn't really matter what the incoming level is. You just set it accordingly. So probably what you should do is have a module in your Eurorack which converts Eurorack level into line level, dropping at 18 dB, something like that, so that you can route it to your mixer properly or to your recorder. That's generally what you would do. But I'm bypassing all of that because I'm just making this up as I go. So I'm plugging the Eurorack directly into this channel. I'm sticking it on line and then I'm adjusting the gain until I get my metering here farting around in the yellows. And metering is different on an analog desk to how it is in the digital world, in your DAW. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've been using a DAW, been using digital recording for about 25 years. And so I'm very familiar with 0 kind of being the top. 0 is the point that you just don't quite want to reach. A 0 in what format? I mean, who knows? Who cares? Who cares what the format is? I'm just talking about the numbers and flashing lights, because that's what means something to me. Whether it's dB, FS, dB, I don't really care. What I'm interested in is what sort of levels do I need. So the 0, as I say, in a DAW is at the top. Here, it's right down here. They've got all of these numbers above it, up to 24 numbers, 24 loudness above it. And so we need to understand how much of this we're supposed to fill. I mean, there's no supposed. You're supposed to do it however it works. Whatever feels right to you. This is analog. You push it until it sounds good or not. That is the way you work with analog gear. It's not about trying to fill a certain amount of bits in order to get the best recording. You're just looking at trying to get a good sound. Now, trying to interpret that, trying to find a way of translating that into something that's actually useful. I asked a lot of people, and generally speaking, you just need to light the oranges, really. I mean, 0 is your starting point. And so if you can get the 6 or 12 or the 18 sort of flashing around, you don't really want the clip light unless that's the sound that you're going for, because you're starting to overdrive the electronics and that's going to increase the saturation and the distortion, and that may or may not be what you're after because it's analog, and that might be nice. But as a general rule of thumb, get it flashing in the yellow. So to do that, you're using the source from Eurorack, which you may or may not have a level control over. In my situation here, I've got no level control over this at source. It's just coming out. I'm not going through a VCA. It's just coming directly from I can't even tell you. It's coming directly from something. The Bafako Pony VCO through a wasp filter. So I have a bit of level control on the filter, but I'm just trying to keep that at about level. And that is what's coming through here. So then I use the gain knob to adjust the input level so that I get orange lights. So about like that. That's what I would say. And then I use my fader to control how much of that I want. And whatever I do, it shouldn't distort because I've set the input gain correctly. That's the idea. Turn things up, turn things down, turn things up, turn things down. So next you have these two STQs. Now this is SSL speak essentially for effect sends. I mean, you can use them for all sorts of things. It's essentially a routing of this signal out of another stereo output. That's what it is. So you can use that to be whatever you want it to be. For my purposes, what I want in a mixer is effect sends. I want to be able to use a couple of effects, like these fellas here. And so that's what I've done. I've routed this to this one, I think, and this to that one. It might have been better if I had that the other way around, but hey, that's just how it turned out. And so I'm using these two here as effect sends through these magic boxes here. Yeah? Now the thing with effect sends is that they need to have a corresponding return. And because these aren't called effect sends, you don't have an effects return anywhere on this mixer either. But what you do have is external inputs, what are called external inputs, which are over here. So these come directly back in to the main bus, to the main output. This stuff over here, they come directly back into, and you've got a little bit of level control over them here. So I am using these two STQs, STQ1, STQ2, as effect sends through an effects back in here. That's the complexity of that routing system. And that works really well once you've bent your head around the idea that these are effect sends. That's what their purpose is. And you can turn them on, you can turn them off, which is great. So they're there, they're not there. You can pan them. I don't know of any situation where I'd want to do that, but that's something you can do. And the other interesting thing is you can have it post or pre-fader. So that means, at the moment I got it post-fader. So as I pull the fader down, it's no longer going to the effect. If I have it pre-fader, so without those pushed in, I can turn the fader down, but it's still going through these two channels. And that's really interesting. I love that. The fact that I could have other things like over here that is not turned up, but it's sent through the effects. So I've got this very background, sumptuous, deep in the effects sound coming through. And then I can bring the dry back in. So on this first one I've got the microcosm, and turn that on, whack that up a bit. And that's kind of a patterned delay. Takes a little while to go away. then this is to the reverb. So that's a beautiful thing. Next up we have EQ here, which again you can turn on, you can turn off. It's again a lovely thing to be able to turn these things on and off, as opposed to them always being there and you're having to dial something down. So I can set a level of send and then just turn it off if I don't want to use it, rather than having to change the setting that I liked that was on it. Same for the EQ. There may be a point at which I want to take the EQ out, like if I'm doing a transition between another thing, I might want to take out the bass of this as I bring something else bassy in, for instance. So for EQ, you've got a high, a mid and a low. So essentially you've got like hi-fi controls of treble, mid and bass. Really, you can also invoke a bell shape, so it's a wider, more of a shelving type of EQ. That's high, mid and low. Now, I'm not a massive fan of EQ. I mean, I don't mean fan, I mean I just don't use it very much, because I kind of like the sound that I have. I think it's when you get to the second level of sound engineering that you then start seeing EQ as a way of fitting frequencies around each other and tracks around each other. I don't tend to listen that intently, to be honest. I keep trying to do clever things and I'm never quite sure that's really working for me or not. But hey, you know, if something, I've taken the bass down on here for some reason, and I could take the high out of that one, just so that those two tracks fit together slightly better, one lower, one higher. I could then also pan, because that's the next thing that's going on. Turn things up, turn things down. I know, I'm a riot. I know. So the next thing is the compressor. So each of these super analog channels has this compressor. It's a very simple one. There's no real control over it other than the threshold and the fact that it's on or not. There's no like attack, decay, there's no makeup gain or any of those sorts of things. Now, this is really where I demonstrate my lack of experience where it comes to these things. I mean, I've used compression in software, and you tend to apply it after the effect, after the recording. You've already recorded it and then you're trying to compress it into something. Whereas what this is challenging you to do is to apply compression before recording. And that's proper sound engineering. That's proper recording to tape type stuff. And for that, you kind of gonna have to know what you're doing. But I mean, you got to start somewhere. So one starts with playing with it and seeing how that works, seeing whether that's any good, seeing whether you can use it to change the sound of what you're recording. Is it because something is lost and you're trying to bring something together? Is it because something is too loud, or it has these loud pops that you're trying to bring down? Those are the questions about compression, I suppose, that you make. So if I change to a bit more of a percussive track, I'll take out the reverb, and let's see whether I can make a difference by compressing it. So let's bring it up a little bit, it's a little low. Let's see if I can fill a couple more of those yellow lights. So that's without any compression. I'll put the compressor in and then bring the threshold up. In order to include more. Has that made any difference whatsoever? It's difficult to say. That's out. That's back in. So really, I mean, compression is going to depend upon your source material. I mean, what am I trying to achieve here when I've got a sound which isn't particularly dynamic in the first place? So what I'm probably doing is talking complete rubbish. So if I was to try that back here, would that have any use? See, I don't really know, but what we will do is I will plug a guitar and a microphone into here, and perhaps that will reveal a little bit more of what the compressor is actually going to be useful for. So finishing off our channel strip then, you've got an insert button. Now insert is something which interrupts the signal. So on the back here, each channel has an insert send and return, essentially. So this is for effects or other processing. You could run this through an external EQ box or another compressor, some other preamp, or an effects box, and use this button to interrupt this signal, to send it out through that loop and back in again. So when you press that in, you no longer get any signal through, because this is now routing out of an output out the back, which I have not connected. So that's what your insert is for. Very, very useful if you have other hardware processors. Me, it's of no use whatsoever. This other button here is about USB outs. We're going to get to the whole USB engine at some point very soon, because this whole thing is an audio interface. It is a multi-channel USB audio interface, both going in and both coming out, which it gets very, very interesting, and we're going to look at that. That's why this video is going to be super long, super long. Then down here you've got a mute/bus B button. So mute, we understand that. There's no solo button, which is, you know, that's a shame. I like a solo button. But having said that, there's enough or few enough channels that you can actually mute everything but one with your fingers. So you can get away with that. But no solo button. But a mute button, which also switches it to bus B. Bus B, what the heck is that? Oh, I don't know. It's another thing out the back. There's another output which has got bus B written on it. And it means that you can switch each channel to this other bus B output. There's probably something here about it too in this mess, which we'll look at in a minute. So that's the idea of the mute button. It either turns stuff off and it routes out to this other bus. Then you've got pre-fader level, which, I don't know, it's almost like a bypass button where you just hear what's coming through before anything else goes on. I should probably look that up. So that's your channel strip. That's your main channel strip. Now there's a few differences over here on a stereo one. Now these can be mono. You've got a mono switch up here, which is in for some reason. We don't want that, do we? Because I've got a nice stereo signal coming in. You've got gain here, so it's only line level input, but again you can adjust the gain. I'm coming directly from the Eurorack through my little patch bay, from the polycinematic straight into channels 5 and 6 here. And I use this again to adjust to get the level just about where you want it into those oranges. Again, you've got your stereo sends, your stereo cues here for the two external effects that I've got in. You've got your post or pre fader, what's it? You've got a little bit of EQ, the same again, this time without the bell curve, but you've got straightforward 3-band EQ. And then you've got your balance pan, your fader, no compressor on the stereo channels. The same USB out post fader button, which we'll get confused with in a little bit. You've got your mute, bus B, and your pre-fader level. So simpler, but similar. Also no panning on the Q, on the SDQ thing. So it looks a little bit less cluttered, I suppose, over here than it does here, because you've lost this whole compressor thing, you've lost a knob there, you've lost a panning knob there, and a couple of buttons. So they look slightly slimmer, slightly stripped down, which they're not really. It's essentially the same thing. And you've got 4 lots of this. No insert effect either for the stereo channels. Really nice. See, I wouldn't have put those things together on purpose before, because I'm using the Descartes voice, which is over there, which I don't generally have connected unless I'm working on that particular bunch of modular. So I've brought that bit of modular in to here, which is brilliant. And then I've got, as I say, the polycinematic coming in here, and then I've got the micro freak, not the micro freak, and then I've got the mini freak. Also coming in. So just through working with the mixer, it's pushed me out. It's pushed me out from just using a box of modular into including another synthesizer, including another box of modular. All of this expansion I would not have thought about doing. I absolutely would not have done unless I had a way of mixing it together. I mean, sure, I can rearrange my rack, I can swap modules and then use that in the space that I'm using. There's nothing to say I can't add a synthesizer and then route the output of that through a mixer in Eurorack. But it's in using this and getting my head around using this that has brought me outside of myself and allowed me just to reach further into other instruments, into other sounds, and to create this rather extraordinary soundscape. So let's have a look a little bit closer at the master side, this end, the main bit, the main thing. What is this called? Oh, a main. It says main down here, look. It says main down here, right, so that must be what it is. So once you've plugged something in and you've got something flashing on your LEDs over here, let's take that for instance. How do you get it out of your output? Because that is the first hurdle. Because what you tend to have is you've got lights flashing away here brilliantly, you've got your thing up, and you're going, I'm getting no sound, I don't know how to make it sound, and I've got all this stuff, all this rigmarole and shenanigans, and I don't know how to make any of that function. That was what I was thinking when I first got here and started thinking about this. So I'm just going to reset a few things to try to emulate my exploration of what the heck was going on. I mean, first of all, you've got to connect the outputs right at the back, because you have this combination of things. You've got main output, you've got monitor output, you've got alternative monitor output, you've got bus B output, you've got SDQ outputs. What you don't actually have is direct outputs for each of the channels. You do have that via USB into your computer, but you don't have that physically, which is interesting and might be a bit of a deal breaker for some people, I imagine. But what I worked out through a process of talking to people and a little bit of elimination and trial and error is that your main output, the main thing, is going to go to your recorder. It's the thing that you want to capture your performance on, because that's what a mixer is about. This is about capturing performances. It's about recording ultimately. And so your main output needs to go to that. So in my case, that's the lovely reel-to-reel. See this fella here? Look. See nothing. Because I haven't pressed the right button. So, but what I want is everything to go to here. That's what I want my main output to go to. Now the thinking behind that is that once you've got your levels for your main, you want to be able to keep that the same and record to it regardless of how loud your speakers are. So what you use for your speakers is the monitor output, which is this here. And you're thinking, oh no, but I don't want to use a little thing like this in order to control my speakers. I want to use the big thing here. So, but hey, that's the compromise you have. And actually these two are used together, because with this is down, nothing is coming out of here. So this is kind of a subset of your main fader. So this is what you're setting to get your recording level right to your reel-to-reel or your recorder or to whatever it is you're plugging it into. And then this allows you to control the level to your speakers with some extra little superpowers in here that help with that. But first, we just need to get sound out. So we've got a whole load of sound going through our mixer. So this is what we're trying to look at. Something here is going to allow this to happen. Now at the top here, you've got some weird buttons for your external inputs, which are annoying. You've got all this talk back business. I mean, talk back is for if you had like a control room and a vocal booth and you wanted to talk to somebody through their monitoring speakers or something. You know, it's not something I've ever used or will ever do so. You can use this as another input to the system if you wish, but I'm ignoring that entirely. So ignoring that, ignoring this. So next we've got this G series bus compressor. Now apparently this is taken from some legendary console thing, I think. Again, it's not something that I can adequately explain or demonstrate to you, but it's something which I hope to learn about as I use this mixer more, because I get the feeling that as I'm recording, particularly to tape, I'm going to want to increase the relative levels of everything and perhaps squash that dynamic range down so that I can get more of that music onto the sweet spot on the tape, rather than having a wider dynamic range where some of it gets lost into the noise floor, into the mush. So this, my understanding of it in a basic way, is that it's going to glue things together, bring things and tighten things together, but I don't actually know really how to use it currently.
other than it's a compressor and it's got a threshold and I can turn it in and I've got a makeup gain and that kind of thing. So I can fiddle with it, but how to use it best, I don't know at this time. So then coming down, we've got this section here, which is to do with the master cues, external 1, external 2s. I don't really know. I don't know what that's for. Don't really know what that does, all this section here. Next, you've got the headphones. I mean, what does happen is you tend to get feedback if you've got this on with the other things on. Anyway, by the by, you get the sense now that I don't really understand all this garbage. And that's true. And what I'm trying to find is the button that just makes it work. That's all I'm after. Here I've got headphones. Now the headphones mimic the monitoring section, but you can also switch it to listen to these STQs if you wish. Now that would be useful if you're using it for something other than an effects end, I imagine, but because I'm using it as an effects end, then that's not particularly useful. So these have got the outputs over here and purely follow whatever it is the monitor button here is doing. Finally, we get down to something useful, which is the monitor source, what it is we actually want to listen to. Now the funny thing is that the mixer has been functioning completely right this whole time. I mean, I can't hear anything, but that's my fault for not hitting the right button. However, the mixer is working properly, and if we look back up at my reel-to-reel, now that I've swapped the monitoring over to source, we can see that it's actually getting an input. So this is coming from the main output on the back of the desk, and everything is going through and going out of the main out to here. So it's functioning, it's working. I could record and capture it even though I can't hear anything. So what I'm trying to set up down here is what I am listening to through my speakers. So my speakers are connected to the monitor outputs. Monitor outputs goes through some wires over there and is recorded into my computer on the far side so that you can hear what I'm doing. So in order for that to happen, I need to select the monitor source, which is main. I want to hear the whole mix going through my speakers. And there it is. And at this point, we also get these things light up. So I always thought they were supposed to light up all the time, but no, they're only lighting up on the monitor source. So what we're listening to. And then I've got the main control, but that affects the output to the recorder. So I want to leave that alone once I've got that right. Whereas I can use this to control the level to the speakers. It's also got a couple of useful buttons. A dim, which just turns it down a little bit so you can perhaps talk to each other when you're listening. Or a cut, which cuts it entirely. So this means that this is still going to my recorder, it's still being recorded, but it's just that I've cut the feed to my speakers. See, that's really clever. Now the other thing you may have noticed is that we're not currently listening to the effects that are coming back into the external inputs here. So I need to also turn these on so that they can be heard. Now there's two things I have to do here, which again gets confusing. I can turn on the externals to the monitor as a source. See, there they are. But they're not currently going to the main output. You're going to have to trust me on that. I've already tried this out. So I don't want to monitor those. I want them to go through the main and then I hear them. Because I want them to be part of what's being captured out of the recording output. So to do that, I have to turn it on here and there. External 1, external 2. That means that these are now routing to the main. They're summed directly into the main along with all of this mixing. And in order to hear them, they are there, but I just need to turn those up a little bit. Now it's all there. So I take those out, put them back in. So that there is how I've got it set up. That's my routing. So stuff from Eurorack coming into different channels on here, synthesizer coming into different channels, routing through a pair of external effects boxes, which are then being summed back into my main here. The main is going to my recorder, the monitor is going to my speakers. which I can listen to separately without affecting the level which is going to my recorder. Got all that? So is that gonna work? Well, why don't I just do a little bit of recording through this fella here. Just by way of example, and then we'll play it back. So what are my levels on here? Oh, I don't know. It seems to be about right. Look, it's hitting around. The needles are jumping in that beautiful way that they do, not going too hot, hopefully, most of the time. So I'm just going to balance that a little bit, stick that in the middle. Everything else more or less where it should be. My monitoring source tells me that overall I'm filling up 15 noises, 15 loudness over there. That's all good. So if I stick this into record, is that recording? Yeah, that's recording. Okay, there was some recording to tapes. Let's stop that. Let's rewind and play. So I should have it coming through here. So, beautiful.
there you go. Recording, captured, Eurorack synthesizer performance, well, you know, to some degree, captured through the desk onto my reel-to-reel, which I can then play back through it and enjoy it again. I mean, that in itself is pretty awesome. This scenario of embracing a larger part of my studio through this desk into a recorder that's there, it's wired in, it's ready to go. Everything is going through. I can adjust each channel individually until I'm ready to make that performance. And I would not do that. I mean, if you're trying to look at pros and cons in using it in studio, it does add an extra layer, and that layer may ultimately be a barrier to what you're doing. If you just want to quickly capture a performance, then this isn't really adding anything to that, because you could do that already just using, you know, the output module you've got on your case. You can just go straight to your recorder, which is what I've been doing previously. You've got that wired in, you just hit record and off you go. Running through this, it takes you away from your modular a little bit in having to think about something else. Now, the trade-off with that is that thinking about your audio channels, thinking about that signal flow, thinking about how things relate and sit with each other is going to make your music sound better. Undoubtedly. Now, I don't always care about that. Sometimes I just want to capture it in the moment. I mean, often I'm live streaming where it's just going straight to YouTube, where it's going to sound pretty ropey at the best of times. So why am I fussing? I mean, I'm not going to fuss around with trying to make that sound gorgeous, because yeah, there's a sort of a cycle of diminishing returns ultimately. But if I want to improve upon the sound that I'm creating, improve upon the mix of signals and the way things are being brought together and the way that those tracks sit with each other, then this is incredibly valuable in doing that. And in terms of this mixer in particular, it's just such a pleasure to use. It's so well laid out, so large, it's not fiddly. There's no point where I'm, you know, trying to look at something like this and I'm going, oh my goodness, and like this is moving because that's moving, and I nudge that and I'm trying to look at where that is, and it's everything is cramped together. It's not giving me that feeling. This is giving me this feeling of space, of air, of the fact that I can sit here and there's a smile on my face as I'm fiddling and turning stuff up and turning stuff down. And it's highly enjoyable. The fact that I can pre or post the effects, the fact that I've brought these pedals in. I've had these knocking around for ages. The microcosm in particular is one of those really annoyingly beautiful effects that I don't have the time to think about or wire into my system in order to use it enough to get the hang of it. Whereas this is enabling me to do so. So I'm now employing other devices that I haven't made good use of, and I'm able to tap into those and expand upon what I'm doing. Sure, I could use a reverb effect from my Eurorack. Yes, absolutely. But how do I send different things to it? I'm always going to need some form of mixer to do that. I mean, one of the things I've used a lot is the Make Noise Rosie, which is great because it has a send. It's just an output module, but it has a send built in for an effect. So you can loop an effect in and that goes on everything, but it goes on everything the same. Lots of Eurorack mixers do have effect sends to enable you to do that, and that's great. So with this, I'm expanding upon that idea, but in such a way that I'm taking a step away from my synthesizers, and I'm starting to work on a different, separate process. And that's really interesting, and I found that quite inspiring. I found that I am working differently. I'm working on each one. I'm thinking, how can I fill these channels? So rather than just being happy with a single bass line and a single other thing working together, while that's fun, I'm now going, okay, well, I've got a spare channel here. What can I stick into that? Oh, here, what can I stick into that? And so I'm developing more. I'm bringing more stuff in. I'm using a synthesizer. Do you see how I'm going around in circles with this, and how this is definitely expanding my horizons in terms of my musical composition? Question becomes, is all of that worth the price tag? That's still something that one has to dwell upon, I think. Right, so that's that scenario. The scenario of all the synths into the mixer, out to a recorder. Now I'm going to switch to using it with the computer, with my Surface Pro over here. Currently shut. I'm going to plug it into there and show you how you can use that in a couple of different ways. All right? Right. A Surface Pro 9 here. This is Windows. This is Studio One. Now it connects via a USB-C cable here very simply into the back of the BiG 6. Nothing complicated. There's no software mixer or any virtual environment on the computer. You just get 16 inputs, 16 outputs. Very, very sort of pure and stripped back. So it's treating this like your computer is a multi-track destination. No other shenanigans going on. I mean, I've got an SSL 12, funnily enough, audio interface that I bought recently, and that comes with this entire routing software system with all sorts of stuff going on that I still don't yet quite understand. This, however, comes with nothing. It comes with an ASIO driver where you can set a couple of settings for that. That is more or less it. Otherwise, it's your DAW that deals with it. So what I'm going to show first of all is just straightforward recording into Studio One. Obviously, you can take the main output from the desk, plug that into your existing audio interface, and just record the stereo output of your mixer. Yes, but this enables you to do that in complete multi-track, so that each channel is separately captured and you can then mix and fiddle with it forever to your heart's content on your computer with a mouse, if that's what you would like to do. So you can see I've got all 16 inputs there available at the top. Now there's 16 because you can treat those external inputs as inputs to here, I think, or some other bus type stuff going on. And what's important is that we know that physically we've got 4 straightforward mono channels, then we've got 4 straightforward stereo channels. There's other shenanigans for those other 2 stereo channels, but we're not going to worry about that. So I've got set up my 4 inputs and then my 3 channels of stereo, because I'm going to use 11 and 12, the last stereo strip here. I'm going to use that as the foldback, the playback from the software. So we go to the outputs here. I've set up 4 outputs, my 4 output channels, and then the 3 stereo channels, and then the main output I've got going to 11 and 12. Because we can use the desk either as something to mix into the computer or something to mix out of the computer, or some kind of combination of that, which I will try my best to demonstrate. But first of all, got that set up is the first thing. Next I want to create a whole bunch of tracks. So I'm going to set up my 4 inputs and then my stereo inputs. So as you can see, we're monitoring each of the tracks directly from the mixer. However, the input is going directly to the software. It's not based on the faders that I've got on the mixer. So my mix here is actually having no effect on the input to software at this stage. So this is one way of doing it, directly from the BiG 6's audio interface directly into the computer. So if we hit record, we can see that's all being picked up brilliantly. It's just going in as it is. It has nothing to do with what I've set on the mixer. It's just going purely on the levels that are set into the BiG 6 in the first place. Now with a bit of luck, if I play that back, it'll come through on this last stereo channel. Like that. There you go, simple, easy. Now what you may have noticed is that it's gone through completely dry. So it's bypassed any of the mixing facilities on the mixer entirely. It's just gone in dry. Now we might not want that. We might want that, but we might not want that. So we have another option, which is this button along the top of our fader here,
which is USB out post fader. So at the moment with this button out, any audio coming in is going directly to the computer. If I stick all of those in, it will now go through the fader system, I think, and so capture all of the different bits and pieces that are involved in mixing here. So it becomes capturing the mixer performance as opposed to just the audio going through. But let's try that out. Well, it was certainly post fader, but did it include any of the effects and bits and pieces? No, it's still as dry as a bone. So the USB business it's a direct routing of your audio inputs that come to the desk into your software. Now you can choose to either use the faders to control level or not, and you have a button in order to make that happen. However, things like the send effects are not being used, because if you think about it, in order to capture that, you're going to have to stick the effects into an input, because the send effects are not part of this channel. They're not part of each channel. The output is not being returned to here, and so you can't record it as part of that channel. Does that make sense? If it was an insert effect, if I was using an insert effect, then the output of the effect comes back into the same channel. With the sends, the result, the output of the effect is coming back into these external inputs over here. So try as I might, I can't get the effect sends back into here, not without using up some of the existing channels. So there are some buttons over here, for instance, you can set up so that the effect sends here, the STQ1 and STQ2, can be routed to USB. So you can set it up so that the STQ1 and STQ2 can be routed to USB, inputs 9 and 10, 11 and 12. So these, if you wanted to use the computer as an effect send, you can route all of this out to these two channels here via these buttons, and that'll route through the computer and back out again. So that is a way of using those into the computer as an effect send. What you can't do is use these effect sends through your external boxes and have that captured by the computer, unless I take these external outputs, the returns from my effects, and plug those into a couple of the stereo channels here. But of course, in doing that and in using the USB routing here, I am using up very valuable channels on my desk. Now, so the other thing that I can do in that case to get around this is I use this in a two-stage system. So I record multi-channel to the computer, then I play back through the desk and use all of the effects in another mixer performance to do a capture. What do I mean? Well, let me try to demonstrate that. So if I get playback coming from this thing here that we did, if I was just going to loop that, la-di-la-di-la, get that playing. Okay, so that's playing back. At the moment, I've got that set just to come through this fader here. If I press from USB 11 and 12, that's now appearing there. So that's the playback from the computer. Yeah? However, I can set that up so that each channel is pulling from the computer. So they've all got the from USB button at the top. If I turn all of those on, I've now got no monitoring on my meters here because this has stopped anything coming into the mixer. Instead, I've now got a direct connection from the computer going into here. But there's nothing there because I haven't set that up here yet. So I need to go into each individual channel and set up its individual output. I should now have those here. And I do. So now I can use these channels mixed through my stereo sends and reintroduce the effects. I turn those back on here on my main fader output. So now I'm essentially using the playback of the individually captured tracks on my computer back through the mixer, doing a mixer performance of this through the effects to then be captured perhaps to my reel-to-reel or to something else. So do you see how that functions? I've got multitrack into the computer, potentially multitrack back out if I want. Obviously I don't have to do that. I could just capture dry onto the computer or put the effects onto a couple of the spare stereo channels if I want to capture those too, and then mix and process on here. Or I capture dry, do all my mixing and processing on there. Or I capture playback through. It's the versatility. Do you see how many different ways you can do things? Let me show you one more thing on here before we do this differently. Again, before we start to introduce real instruments and see what that looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to route the first stereo Q channel to this, to use that as essentially a bus effect, as a send effect, and then bring that back in onto channels 11 and 12. I think. So let me go back, take everything out of its USB mode, set for 11 and 12. So I've got this fella coming in again. I'm going to take it out of both of those for a minute. I'm going to stick Q1 here to 9 and 10. So I think this will work. I think. So it's this one. If I turn that on and turn it up, you'll see it'll start to come in on level. And you can hear the analog delay. But that does mean that I'm using up channels 9 and 10 in order to do that. And if I was to do the same with the other STQ, it would use up channels 11 and 12. So there are routing compromises required in order to use the full facility of everything with the DAW. You've got to work out, what it is that's more important, what it is you want to use, and how you want your workflow to go. I mean, what I like about this is that I can, with just the push of a button, suddenly route out, rather than using hardware boxes, I can use a software box. So that level of integration is really interesting. I sorely wish that it had its own bus, that it just had another channel or something. I wish that those externals could be routed directly into the software, because that would really sort it out. Because then I could use these additional 13, 14, 15, 16 channels for the external returns, and that means I could capture these boxes directly into the computer. Or I could use those as the returns from the software. So I'm not using that send onto channels that already exist. It'll be using it on additional channels. So I don't quite follow the thinking that they've laid out in why you have to sacrifice channels in order to do that. But hey, that seems to be what we have.
Right, a couple of things left to try. We're nearly there, I think. And that's to plug in a guitar and a microphone. And just to do that, to do some recording through the desk, to show you and demonstrate that, perhaps. And then we'll try to do something really clever with Bitwig. And then I think we're done. And then I think we're there. I think that'll be enough. So I'm going to sacrifice my first two channels. Not sacrifice, I'm going to employ my first two channels as a mic, preamp and a guitar input. So they no longer have lovely Euroracky stuff coming in. So what do I need to think about? Well, I've got a channel here. I'm going to need to take it out of line, so it hopefully becomes something like a microphone input. So that's its default settings. I don't have to have anything pressed in. I've just got gain to deal with, and I've got my monitoring level here before I have anything turned up. So I can turn that up until I get it to the right low sort of thing. I want to be filling up those yellow boxes. Oh yes. I'll turn on the effects so I can hear some interesting stuff going on through my voice once I've got this turned up. 1 2 1 2 1 2. There's definitely something there. Obviously I need to be careful, a little bit of feedback. 1 1 2. And then on the next one I've got guitar, so I can set that to high Z. So at this point I can possibly sing, I could possibly record myself, I could possibly go along with some guitar, and I'm using the compressor in order to work on the voice in order keeping the dynamic level correct. Yeah. Ooh, yeah. Ooh, yeah. Yeah. So what I think I will do is I will finish off just by trying to do something clever in Bitwig. Okay, so to do something clever, what I'm going to attempt to do is use the mixer, use the microphone, use the guitar, use the backing, and at the same time record clips into Bitwig of what I'm doing so that I can then play that back with it. That seems incomprehensible. Or at least highly unlikely or dubious at this point. But it's definitely possible. But I'm going to go and have some lunch and then come back and think about it. So I've been refueled, and now I'm going to attempt this Bitwig shenanigans. What I'm trying to achieve here, now I have already done this, and I've released a video of kind of a performance I did that involved Bitwig and clip capturing and such like, and I thought that's a really interesting thing and is a way that I would use or want to incorporate this hybrid situation of this analog monster routed through a cute little laptop, a little Surface, capturing things, adding effects, coming back, mixing back through, all of it being folded in with my Eurorack and synthesizers. There's a lot in here that really I find quite exciting, and so it's that I'm going to attempt to show you how that works. Now I might fudge this up completely, so do go and check out that other video of where it actually worked really quite smoothly, but I'm going to attempt to show you how I set that up. because I think that nicely highlights another workflow and way of incorporating this into your creativity. So what we're going to be doing, Eurorack through here, yes. Voice and guitar, I'm going to want to capture that as clips in Bitwig. So I've got analog mixing, digital recording going on. I'm going to want those clips to play back through the mixer in time with everything else. So that's going to require some synchronization. This doesn't have MIDI, so that's a shame, because if it had MIDI, then I could use its MIDI interface in order to do some MIDI clock into here, which I could probably work out how to use. So that would have been one avenue. Obviously I could use a MIDI interface, a separate MIDI interface, to try to achieve that. But what I would like to do is use this, because in my experimentation with it, I think it's DC coupled, or at least in places. Well, let's see, shall we? So perhaps this is also going to be useful for getting modulation into and out of your system. In fact, I could probably... Could I work that out right now? So let me take channel 4 just for a second. Okay, this is a very exciting side channel adventure, side quest that I wasn't expecting. So if I was, so this is channel 4, right? So I just stick an LFO into channel 4, and let's see if we can get it to move something. So I want 4 to be going directly into the computer, which I think I've got. So let me just bring you over here to the screen. Okay, so just to test this quick idea of running an LFO through this being DC coupled into here, just to show that I've added a filter to the Mini Freak, which is coming in. I'm then going to add a hardware input from channel 4, which is what my LFO is going into. I'm then going to map that to the cutoff, like so. And as you can see, that is definitely moving. So if I speed up the LFO, slow it down, now that behaviour there is suggesting to me that it's actually AC coupled, because it's not really handling it when the LFO is low. So if I take out the LFO and just use my molten motion meter to give it a voltage value, then believe me, I'm moving it over here. I'm moving this knob. You can see that if I move it fast, it does find a value, but I should be able to do a flat voltage, and it's not doing that. So that to me means it's AC coupled, so that ain't gonna work. So I can't use CV entirely in and out of this mixer. I can use it if it's moving a bit, but in order to send a flat voltage, that's not going to work. So, side quest completed. Let's go back to what we were originally talking about. So we need to be able to sync between the two. I'm not using MIDI, I'm going to use the audio interface. To do that, I'm going to send clock, which is pulses, which will work whether it's DC coupled or AC coupled or not. I'm going to send pulses from the clock device here through one of my channels and into the Eurorack. Now this is complicated, or additionally complicated, because the Big 6 has no direct outputs. So if I send the clock to a channel on here, I can't get it anywhere other than to the master outputs, and it will be mixed with everything else. So that's a problem, but it's something that we can solve. So I've created a clock out track. I've got the clock module here, and that allows me to send clock to a particular output. I've selected this output here, mono output, which I've set to channel 3, because I'm using the first two for mic and guitar. So I'm going to have to sacrifice a whole channel, a whole super analog channel, in order to make this happen. Why does it have to be a super analog channel, I hear you ask? Well, because
the way that I can use this, the way that I can route that individual channel out, or the only way that I can come up with, is to use an insert. So I have to use one of those 4 channels. So I can unplug that channel. There's nothing going into it now. I now need to route it to a clock on my Eurorack. Okay. So this is set up. We're just going to send clock out. Okay, you can see it's going. There's a clock. So I'm going to send that clock to my PAMS Pro workout, and that's going to go, "Way!" and that should all be fine. This is more fun than you could possibly imagine. So I'm going to do a bit of shenanigans with the old cabling here. Right, so I've got to find the insert for channel 3 on the back with all this sort of stuff plugged in, not being able to see what's going on. It does come with a very handy little quick start manual, which does show you where everything is, provided you have it the right way up when you're trying to look over the back to find it. So I know that the inserts, channel inserts, that's returns, sends, hang on, sends and returns are the same. So I want the top, it's this way round, I want the top row over here, third from the left. So over here, 1, 2, 3. I think it's that one. I'm gonna go with that one. Okay, hopefully that's channel 3 insert. Let's turn that on. And I'm going to plug this into the clock input on my PAMS Pro over here. And with a bit of luck, that should work. So channel 3, I can see I've got something coming into it. I need to set that to be from USB 3, so it's coming from there into this channel. I plug the insert button in, that's now sending it out of that cable into my PAMS Pro. Now my PAMS Pro is seeing that as 13 BPM, and here I've got 110, but that's because this clock setting is completely wrong. I need to set this to 24 pulses per quarter note, which is 1/96th, like so we can no longer see it, it's going so fast. And over here on the PAMS, it's now 110, which is awesome. So these two are now synced. This is in charge, this is following, which means I should be able to capture clips into here and for them to play back in sync with this. There's no way that's going to work. Yeah, no, I think it might. But of course I've had to sacrifice a channel to do that. Never mind, let's not focus on that. Let's focus on the positives. So how best to film this, I wonder? Well, a little bit of everything. So this feels really messy. So let's give this a go. So I've got a little bit going on here coming from the Eurorack. I'm going to hit a record on the Mini Freak here in order to record a loop of something there that will then hopefully keep on playing back. I'm monitoring the Mini Freak through its channel directly to here through effects within Bitwig and back out again. That's the plan. That's the plan. Let's give it a go. So that's pretty nice. Now for the guitar channel, channel 2, I've set up a bit of an amp simulator on here because I'm not going to be able to use the effects sends here until I do something with them on playback. But at the moment all the playback's just being routed to this stereo channel here. So I'm trying to do all the effects on the computer. That way it's making this more versatile, using everything to its strengths, if that makes sense. So all we've got to do is make the clip happen. And then finally I can bring in my voice in some way or form or shape. It should be coming in to this channel here. 1, 2, like so. Just have to sing something. Now what I could do is put these individual channels back to appropriate inputs here and remix through again. So with those effects, but then also coming back in here to potentially use these effects too. Is that good or useful? Don't know. Let's try that out. So for the Mini Freak, I'm going to put that on stereo out 2, guitar out 2. Vocal out 1 so that it's on the same channel as it was going in. Are you still with me? So I now put these from USB, and 9 and 10 from USB. So I now have those clips captured and playing back through individual channels, which I could have had set up from the start. And then all I do is switch those in between stuff coming in through the inputs and the USB coming back. So I can now plug those in to my other outboard effects. I can then pan it left and right. And there's nothing to stop me creating a virtual instrument in here and having that playing alongside. It all just works together in this strangely integrated tendrils of signal flow and possibilities of turning things up, turning things down. So there we have it. I think that is my exploration into the SSL BiG 6. It's an enormous mixer
for your desktop with an enormous amount of power and flexibility and routing and stuff with knobs on and levels and turning up and turning down and rerouting and effects processing and recording and then playing back and then mixing and then adding another thing. It's an amazing thing, and it's been an absolute pleasure to work with. I mean, I had this huge, what felt like an enormous wall to get over to start with. I was intimidated by this thing. It sat there going, oh, you don't know what you're doing. You have no clue what you're doing. And I had to deal with that for a while. It just sort of sitting there throwing insults at me from across the room. But I grabbed hold of it and I wrestled with it and delved into it and found out things, discovered stuff, played with it, routed things, started recording things, mixing, really starting to enjoy the blending of sounds. Now, there's no reason why I can't blend on the Eurorack. No reason why I can't do that at all. I do that, have done that, will continue to do that, no doubt. But in this environment, it just gives you the space to think. It gives you the space to develop stuff. It gives you a nuance in these massive faders. It gives you a level of inspiration that I wasn't expecting. I don't think. I don't know what I was expecting. I was expecting to spend a bit of time with it and going, oh, I just can't be bothered and just send it back. Because I took a massive risk in taking it on, I felt. Because I knew this was going to take time. It's not something that you can play with for a day and just go, oh, yeah, this is how it is. I don't think that's doing it any sort of justice. So I've had to give it a couple of weeks. I've had to work with it, change things around, swap. And each time, of course, I'm having to come up with a new patch or something else to put through it because I would have broken it through all of my explorations. So, I just wanted you to know that I've put the work in, is all I'm saying, in order to try to work out what this is about. But should it be this mixer? Is this the one? I mean, what is it particularly about the solid state logic BiG SiX that makes it interesting? Because other mixers are going to have similar facilities. Other mixers have sends and returns. Other mixers have direct outs, which might be useful. Other mixers have more channels. It really doesn't have a high channel count. I mean, 4 mono channels, 4 stereo channels. That really is it, unless you want to muck around in all that other stuff. That's really 8 sources, which is not huge. I mean, I regularly use 6 within Eurorack. So I can fill this easily. In fact, it fits almost perfectly to what I do. I don't have enough stuff going on in order to overflow it. So that's great. So for me, in my scenario, it's a really good fit. But I think for many other people, it's not got nearly enough channels. It doesn't have like ADAT or something with which to expand it. It just is as it is. So you've got to bake that into whether that fulfills the criteria of what you're after. It's really interesting in how this is different to other mixers. Like I say, you can very easily get a 16-channel Mackie in this space, but you wouldn't then have the space with which to find yourself around here. Because what this doesn't do, once you got over the first couple of hurdles of working out which buttons to turn on, it doesn't frustrate you. Mixers nearly always frustrate you. Unless you're working with a mixer full time, it's going to piss you off at some point because of all that, where is it? So many things, so many places, so many buttons. But this doesn't tend to do that because it's ordered, it's spacious, you can see. The LEDs are excellent. Those are enormously helpful to see things that are engaged, and the fact that you can turn them on and off at all is fantastic. There's shenanigans over here that I don't fully comprehend, but that's okay. I feel I've got into this mixer to a certain level enough to use the majority of its features for the betterment of my music in a creative and inventive way. So in that regard, I don't need to know this stuff. It's things I can discover down the line as I gain more experience and understanding of it. So I like the fact this can be permanently wired to my computer, perhaps, and that I can get into sending and receiving. I can use it as an effects processor, I can use it as a recorder, or I can go straight to my open reel, which is just there waiting for me to pump something into it. That is brilliant.
I wonder how it will change the way I work with Eurorack, because it is already doing that. I'm spending less time there and time here, but that's only because I'm focused on the mixer at this time. I wonder how that's going to change as I start just to make music. How much of a focus is this going to be? Or am I going to end up leaving it on a particular place, on a particular bunch of settings, and then it sort of more or less becomes static? I don't know. It's an interesting question. I think SSL have made a lot of interesting decisions with this. I mean, I don't have a lot of mixer experience to compare it to necessarily, but it seems that they really have targeted this at exactly where I am, which is having some synths, some Eurorack, some audio, some guitar, a little bit, so it's a small studio solution. And it does solve a lot of problems. It stops me having to mess around, assuming I'm not having to change anything at the back, because I hate having to change anything at the back. But assuming that's set up right, then it fills all of these places. It gives me access and routing to all the things that I would otherwise have to be unplugging and replugging all the time. So I think they've done an awesome job at placing this exactly where I think a lot of us are. I think a lot of us are in our sheds, in our cupboard under the stairs, in our attics, with a bit of this and a bit of that, and are wondering how we really put it together. And maybe you have picked up a 60 quid mixer like this from SubZero or Behringer or something of the like. Maybe you have, and maybe you're using that, and maybe that's enough. Should you then be considering something as expensive and awesome as this? Now, I say expensive only in as much as that it costs a lot of money, not in that it's not worth it. That's a different question. Is it worth it? That's really hard to answer, because there's a lot in this that you're not going to find here, just purely in the tactile interface, the way you interact with it. And is that the most important factor? Sometimes, possibly. Sometimes. So it's a question, how do you answer that? I'm not entirely sure. But what I will do right now, as the end to this enormous video, is plug all of this into here and see if I can have the same experience. I don't mean the same experience. I mean, will it kind of work? And just to show that everything that I've done, to some degree, is possible on much less gear. Will it sound as good? I don't know. I mean, I've not tried this, so shall we just try it? I'm just going to use the Eurorack and stuff. I think trying to set it up with the computer is just a bit too complicated at the moment. So I'm just going to run my original patch through this, and we'll see how that sounds. Yeah? So first of all, I haven't got quite so many facilities. I've only got one return, so I'll use that. But otherwise, I've got 2 stereos and 4 channels. So it gives me an opportunity to show you the back. See, that's all very exciting. Look at all those things. And it is labelled upside down as well, so you can look over the back if you can actually see that. With my eyesight and the darkness at the back, I can't, sadly. But it's a good, it's there. I mean, they talk about how it's portable. You can stick it in a bag and carry it to your gig. Yeah, well, maybe, I guess. More so than you can an enormous mixer, I suppose. Right, SubZero. Let's see what you could do. So I'm just going to use the main speaker out, because I don't have all those other facilities. That's going to be the outputs there. I'm going to use my reverb, I think, which is output. So do I have a single? What's my send? Send just got a single, so I'll go in one side. I have to use 7 and 8 as a return, so that's already reduced my channel count, not to worry. So let's use these here. I've got, that's channel 5, so channel 1, it's going to go in there. That's 5. I'll do 5 and 6 together. Right, let's turn everything down, plug her in. So, everything down. Let's see if I can get something out.
You don't need all that big posh rigmarole. You just need a little 50 quid SubZero mixer. Or do you? I mean, it's impossible to tell. I mean, what I'm hearing, for me, is nothing like what I was hearing through the Big SiX. Nothing like. I mean, there's a similar blend of sounds. But I don't feel that this is part of my process. It's feeling like this is a utility. It's a tool with which I can mix a couple of things together. Whereas the Big SiX felt like this is part of my creative endeavor. This is part of my adventure, my journey. I'm using this and enjoying the feel of that and moving things around. That feeling has not really translated to this. Now, that might be just my perception. It may just be the way that I feel about things. It may be my biases creeping in and all those things. And I've used this mixer a lot. I use it at gigs and things like that. So I have nothing against it. I know that it works all right. I mean, I can't hear the kick drum. That doesn't seem to be coming through at all. Obviously, there's a certain amount of muddiness because I've combined a couple of channels. And also, I mean, just the usage and nuance of using the sends to that effect is just not there. It's not there. It's just mush. And I'm having to obviously use up a stereo channel in order to have the return on that. Evidently, there's no inserts either. There's phantom power, there's mic preamps and that kind of thing, but I'm not getting the same sense, and all I can be is on it and as an authentic as I can, and that's my vibe from this. But at the same time, I have mixed stuff together. Let's see, I've turned stuff down, turned stuff up again. You know, there's no sense of comparison. There's no sense of that I know how loud this is compared to the others. You know, that lack of metering is really a problem. The lack of being able to see easily where all of those faders are, you know, that's a problem. The switching in of effects and the nuance of that is kind of all there or not. So what I'm getting is this loud mush of sound, which is perfectly okay, but it is not the intricate nuance and enjoyment that I was having with the Big SiX. So there you are. That I think is as far as I can wring out of this thing. So I hope that comparison was in some way useful to some degree. And I mean, I think now my position is, when I talk about these things, is that I understand much better why people use mixers. I mean, it's an obvious thing, and it's something that I've pushed back against simply because I don't want to have another piece of gear that I'm having to worry about. But now that I have spent some time worrying about this additional piece of gear, yeah, I like it. I think it can be enormously helpful. Now, I've got to translate this to my head, where if I'm taking just a box of Eurorack out for a performance, then this is not going to be involved in that. So it's not as if I want to find myself completely dependent upon this sort of mixing. I need to be able to do it in the box, in the Eurorack case as well. So, I'm not now just become a studio person. That's not the case. I need to be versatile. I need to find ways and solutions of doing all the things that I want to do. But I'm incredibly grateful to SSL for thinking of me and sending this over to me for me just to give it a go and to unload all of these thoughts and these bumbling, ramshackle possibilities out there for you to look at if you're still with me at the end of this enormous video. So yeah, thanks. Food for thought. Lots of things to chew on, and it's been a really intense couple of weeks, which has forced me into situations where I've had to make music, which is always much appreciated. So there we go. Yeah, I think that'll do. I hope that's helpful. And in the meantime, go make some tunes.